Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about 5 players that I can't stop drafting in 2024 fantasy football. 5 players that I continue to find myself smashing that draft button like it owes me money when I do fantasy football drafts right now. But before we could get into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure you leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter or X, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get into 5 players that I can't stop drafting in 2024 fantasy football. We begin with the first player that I can't stop drafting, and that is Mike Evans, wide receiver of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, current underdog fantasy ADP, wide receiver 17 at pick 23.1, aggregate ADP from Sleeper, ESPN, Fantrax, MFL, and NFFC have him at pick number 30. So on underdog, he is a late second round pick, whereas in aggregate ADP from those other fantasy football sites, you can get him in the middle of the 3rd round. So Mike Evans coming off the board in the late 2nd or anywhere inside of the 3rd round, to me, feels very appropriate for Mike Evans. Now, Mike Evans last year was the wide receiver 7 in PPR and the wide receiver 11 in PPR points per game. He played in all 17 games last season, having 135 targets, 7.9 per game, ranking 17th, 79 receptions, 4.6 per game, 18th, 1,225 receiving yards, 73.8 per game, number 9, and 13 total touchdowns, 2nd at wide receiver. Now, we will talk about this ad nauseum as the fantasy football offseason goes along and as we get closer to fantasy football drafts, and that is the fact that touchdowns are very unpredictable year in and year out at the wide receiver position. Unless you're a guy like Julio Jones, who is essentially allergic to the end zone, or a guy like Mike Evans, who lives in the fucking end zone, it is pretty difficult to predict touchdowns year in and year out. But for a guy like Mike Evans, who has had 12 plus touchdowns in 5 out of 10 seasons since he's been in the NFL, half the time he has scored 12 or more touchdowns. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that you should pencil in Mike Evans for 10 plus touchdowns, because that is not necessarily a guarantee, but he should at the very least score 7 or 8 touchdowns, right? And there is that upside even with Baker Mayfield under center, who I think gets a little scrutinized for kind of just the guy that he is. The upside of Evans really is 15 or more touchdowns. He scored 13 total touchdowns last year while being relatively efficient. He was 13th in fantasy points per route, 15th in fantasy points per target, 13th in yards per route run, 25th in yards per target, 12th in yards per reception, 12th in yards per team pass attempt, and 5th in dominator rating. While I mentioned his touchdowns 5 out of 10 years with 12 plus touchdowns, that is downright phenomenal, right? Putting up those numbers with Baker, putting up numbers with Jameis Winston, with Tom Brady. He has had over 1,000 yards in 10 straight seasons. Every single year of this man's career, he has had over 1,000 receiving yards. With the Super Bowl ring, to me, Mike Evans is a surefire first ballot Hall of Famer when he retires. This is a guy that has been incredibly consistent his whole career, and you don't have to draft him as a top 12, even as a top 15 wide receiver. He's coming off the board as the wide receiver 17. So if Mike Evans was to have a down year, he's still going to be a top 24 wide receiver. And if he has a great year, right, if Baker Mayfield is feeding him the ball, maybe the ball is a little bit more accurate this season, and maybe Mike Evans scores 13 touchdowns again, there is a chance that he could finish top 5 at wide receiver. So Mike Evans not only has league winning upside, has the upside any given week to backhand your opponent Will Smith style, to hit him with the Stockton slap like his name was Nate Diaz or Nick Diaz, right? Mike Evans is also like wrapping a condom around your team. He is incredibly safe. His projection for the season is as safe as it gets, and he also has that crazy big home run upside. So Mike Evans, to me, is a guy that I am going to be entering into my fantasy football drafts targeting. Last year, wide receiver 11 in PPR points per game. 2022, he's the wide receiver 17. 2021, wide receiver 4. 2020, wide receiver 16. And 2019, wide receiver 4. Again, he is a very safe bet to be a top 18 to 20 wide receiver with the upside of smacking off that top 5 season that could help you win your league. I understand that Mike Evans is getting older, and everyone nowadays has this thought process that as the players get older, they're just magically going to fall off the edge of the earth. Like, it's guaranteed that just because Mike Evans is now 1 year older, despite the fact that he has been putting up 1,000+ yards every single year for 10 fucking years, it is all going to come crumbling down like Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall, right? I really don't think that's going to happen. I think we are going to get another great year out of Mike Evans with the upside of him winning your league. At number 2, we got Isiah Pacheco, running back of the Kansas City Chiefs. Underdog ADP, running back 11 at pick 46.5. Aggregate ADP, pick 34. Now, Isiah Pacheco has been someone that I have been keying in on in fantasy drafts all off-season long, since the drafts opened, even before the 2024 NFL draft. And that is because Isiah Pacheco is in an amazing situation, and I think he is in the best situation he has been in his whole entire career to succeed. Isiah Pacheco already has 2 rings. 2 years in, 2 rings, and it would be a shock to absolutely nobody if he won yet another ring in 2024. But the reason why the situation is so good is because I believe this is the best offensive setup that the Chiefs have had yet. They have Hollywood Brown. I know I'm not the biggest fan of Xavier Worthy, but he's a solid down-the-field stretcher type of player. They have Rashee Rice, who could be suspended 4, 6, 8, 10 games, who knows? Or maybe he gets suspended no games because it is currently the end of July, and they still haven't thrown the book at him. They still have Travis Kelce, and they have a solid offensive line. So this is going to be a team that has the ability to hit the defense any given game with an attitude adjustment, right? Any given game, they could drop 30+ points. And the fact that Jerick McKinnon is no longer there opens the backfield to have more targets for Isiah Pacheco. Sure, is Clyde Edwards-Helaire going to come in every once in a while? Of course, but Pacheco will be the clear lead back on this team. Running back 14 in PPR points per game last year, running back 15. Pacheco was a guy that I was high on last year, and I'm going to be high on him yet again. I think he absolutely Hulk smashes his ADP of running back number 11. 14 games played with 13 starts, missed 3 games with a sprained shoulder in the tail end of the season. He had 205 carries, 14.6 per game, number 22, 935 rushing yards, 66.8 per game, 18th, 49 targets, 3.5 per game, 22nd, 44 receptions, 3.1 per game, 17th, 244 receiving yards, 17.4 per game, 22nd, and 9 total touchdowns, 12th. His targets started to increase in a big way towards the end of last season, and with Jerick McKinnon now phased out of the situation, we know that more targets are going to be coming the way of Isiah Pacheco. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that Isiah Pacheco is the most prolific pass-catching running back in the NFL, like he's going to be Christian McCaffrey out there catching a gazillion balls every single game like his name was Kimmy Granger. Of course not. But what I do think that Isiah Pacheco could do is get around 4 targets every single game and make things happen with them. He ranked 12th in yards created last season and 15th in dominator rating. The year started off a little bit slow for Pacheco, but he really found that stride at the end of last season. Week number 12, up against the Raiders, 25.9 PPR points, followed by 21.3 points up against the Packers. Then he returns up against the Raiders, and to me, that was a game where they kind of eased him in. They used the just-the-tip technique. He only got 11 carries in that game, but he did end up scoring a rushing touchdown. He only scored 10 fantasy points, but the biggest tell for me wasn't even that huge game against the Raiders in Week 12, that huge game against the Packers. It was the playoffs. They relied heavily on Isiah Pacheco when everything mattered. In the AFC Championship game, we see 24 carries, 68 rushing yards, and a touchdown. 4 for 4 in the receiving game like he was at Wendy's. for 14 yards. Up against the Bills, 15 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. 1 reception for 14 yards. Up against the Dolphins, as the Chiefs absolutely ruined my dreams as a Dolphins fan. 24 carries, 89 rushing yards, and a tug with 1 reception for -1 yards. While he didn't end up finding the end zone up against the 49ers in that overtime win in the Super Bowl, they still gave him 18 carries. So if they are going to give him 15 plus carries every single game with the upside of getting 20 plus carries, sign me up for the lead back on the Kansas City Chiefs that now has a lot more pass catching upside. To me, this is a no-brainer. Everyone should be all in on Isiah Pacheco. Push the chips to the middle. I love Pacheco this season, and I do really believe he will outperform that underdog ADP as the running back 11. Next up, we move to David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. Underdog ADP running back 18 at pick 76.4. Aggregate ADP pick 66. Now, David Montgomery is definitely more of a floor play compared to a ceiling play, right? Because for things to go perfect for David Montgomery, for him to really smash at running back 18, that would require more than likely Jahmyr Gibbs to get hurt, knock on wood we don't root for injuries, or for David Montgomery to rip off 20 touchdowns somehow, right? They just phase Jahmyr Gibbs out in the goal line and they use David Montgomery a ton. But coming off the board is the running back 18. He is going to have, even with Jahmyr Gibbs getting a bigger portion of this backfield, he is still going to have multiple top 12 games all season and be an incredibly reliable running back 2 game in and game out. And if something was to happen to Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery's value would skyrocket through the moon, past fucking Pluto, straight to Mars. I have no idea the order of the planets. My 3rd grade science teacher fucking failed me. But at the end of the day, his upside would be immense, right? Because without Jahmyr Gibbs in a Dan Campbell offense, even though David Montgomery doesn't have stickum on his hands, right? He's not this crazy pass-catching running back like Austin Eckler in the past. He can catch passes. So if something was to happen to Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery, in my rankings that I release every single week during the season, say Gibbs missed 3 games. He's out week 5, 6, and 7. Again, we don't root for injuries. I don't want that to happen, but say that happens. In week 5, 6, and 7, regardless of the matchup, he is going to be a top 12 running back in my rankings, and it is entirely plausible, like I'm a mythbuster, that he is ranked inside of the top 5 at the running back position those weeks. So he is an incredibly safe option with Gibbs there. I understand they're going to use Gibbs more than they did last season, but I still think on the goal line, when push comes to shove, they are going to jam David Montgomery in there. He has more of a build of a goal line back compared to Jahmyr Gibbs. Montgomery was the running back 15 in PPR last season, 15 in PPR points per game, and 17th on the season. 14 games played with 14 starts. He was averaging 15.6 carries per game, 219 carries, 15th at running back, 1,015 rushing yards, 72.5 per game, 9th, 24 targets, 16 receptions, 117 receiving yards, all ranking outside the top 40. And then he scored 13 total touchdowns, 4th at running back, ranking 6th in average defenders in the box because they were loading the box up for Montgomery. They knew that when Montgomery was in the game, it was a lot more likely that they would run compared to pass, because if you're in a pass-catching situation, then you would want Jahmyr Gibbs in the game, obviously, because that is a guy that can just make one guy miss, and that motherfucker is gone to the crib, and he ranked 17th in true yards per carry. I'm not going to sit here and gargle on the balls of David Montgomery and tell you that he's one of the best running backs in the NFL, because I think he is far from that. But I think in the Lions offense, an offense that's going to be scoring a lot of points, he is a very safe bet. And again, knock on wood, we don't root for injuries. If something was to happen to Jahmyr Gibbs, he could be a league winner. At number 4, we move to Jaxon Smith-Njigba, JSN, wide receiver of the Seattle Seahawks. Current underdog fantasy ADP wide receiver 47 at pick 77.6. Aggregate ADP pick 97, so almost going at pick over 100 in aggregate ADP. But we've been talking about underdog fantasy all video long, and Underdog Fantasy is the sponsor of today's video. So if you guys want to get in some best ball drafts, we're going to be doing best ball drafts all summer long on this channel, live stream. So make sure you guys stay tuned for those, which we're going to be doing once I get back from my bachelor party on Monday of next week. I'm leaving on Thursday. Has nothing to do with anything. It does kind of, but so if you guys want to sign up on Underdog Fantasy, get ready to draft with me. You can claim your special pick plus up to $250 if you are a first-time depositor using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. They have tons of fantasy football contests on there for all buy-in sizes. There's going to be drafts for $3, $5. There's the $25 Best Ball Mania, and there's even going to be drafts that are for, the big dogs out there, $500, $1,000 drafts. So make sure you guys check that out. I believe it is the best way to prepare for your fantasy football draft is by doing these best ball drafts, and you could also potentially win a lot of money. So make sure you claim your special pick plus up to $250 if you're a first-time depositor using promo code Notorious or by clicking on the link in the video description. Again, very soon we'll be live doing these drafts with you guys so you guys can draft with me. So at number 4, we got Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Now, JSN was a guy that was screaming up draft boards last season as it got closer and closer to when you guys were doing your main fantasy football drafts. His ADP was rising like the Dark Knight, right? It was incredible to see his rise, and with that huge rise came a disappointment of large magnitude, right? If you drafted JSN last year, it was essentially like shooting your fucking team in the foot. You were going into battle with 2 toes on your left foot, 5 on the right one, and you were just down bad. Now, if you drafted JSN where you drafted him, obviously it sucked. Did it completely destroy your chances of winning your league? Of course not, but it certainly was not ideal. This year, we're definitely getting a lot more of a discount, and the hype has been dumbed down, right? We saw JSN have this amazing college career, a guy that was really great in college in 2022, and then he gets drafted, and he kind of just gets lost in the mix in Seattle. Wide receiver 47 in PPR, 59 in PPR points per game. When you see you're tied with guys like Tyler Johnson and Michael Wilson, that is obviously not good at all considering where he was drafted. 17 games played, but only 3 starts, 93 targets, 5.5 per game, 63 receptions, 3.7 per game, 628 receiving yards, 36.9 per game, and 4 total touchdowns. None of those numbers rank inside the top 32. Though in terms of efficiency, he was 17th in route win rate, so he was getting open, but he just wasn't getting used correctly. He wasn't one of the first reads, and he was 6th in target separation. Now, we saw some bright spots out of JSN last season. We saw some games where the team really pushed the JSN narrative, and the guy was able to make defenders miss. He was able to get open, and he was able to score fantasy points. The problem was that was not the goal all season long. The goal wasn't to force the rock down the throat of JSN. But now we have a brand new regime in Seattle. Now, we are still cucked in a way by the fact that Geno Smith is the starting quarterback. I know Geno Smith really beat out expectations in 2022 and 2023. He was back to being the same old Geno that we're fucking used to, the guy that got absolutely socked in the Jets locker room. But it is what it is, right? What I think is going to matter at the end of the day, while Geno Smith is far from the perfect quarterback, far from the ideal quarterback for JSN, I think it will work due to what the head coach, the new head coach, not the gum chewer, Pete Carroll. We're talking about old McDonald had a farm, Mike McDonald. He says that JSN is a guy that we can focus our offense around along with other guys. Tyler Lockett is still a great player. DK Metcalf, phenomenal player. The runners, meaning Kenneth Walker and friends, and Noah Fant, they're all solid. But JSN is going to be a massive piece of what we are going to do offensively. So while he gives a little bit of the Suka Lamink, a little bit the Hawk Tua to the other guys, he is really hyping up JSN. And JSN, if you watch his college tape, if you watch some of the good last year, you'd realize just how good JSN is. Now, I fully understand that Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are still there, but DK Metcalf is going way earlier than JSN. We're seeing DK Metcalf go in the 3rd or the 4th round of fantasy drafts. You can get JSN much later. Again, aggregate ADP, you could almost get him past pick 100. So I want to attach myself to players as skilled as JSN, even though the offense is a little bit sucky, in my opinion. Like, Geno Smith isn't the best. They have a lot of weapons, but Geno Smith just doesn't cut it. I think that Geno's good enough that if this offense really is focused on getting the ball to JSN, that JSN could be a straight-up steal as the wide receiver 47 off the board. At number 5, we got Jerome Fode, F-150 running back of the Cleveland Browns, underdog ADP running back 40, pick 127.7, aggregate ADP actually the exact same, pick 127. Now, Jerome Ford and Nick Chubb are going to be a debate that we have all season long, a battle of Obi-Wan Kenobi versus Anakin Skywalker on fucking Mustafar, right? A battle of people talking about Nick Chubb. I'm a 9-inch Nicholas Chubb fan. I love Nick Chubb, but let's call a spade a spade. When you see an injury that bad, when you see the motherfucker's leg, and I'm not making fun of him, his leg turn into a right angle, it seems bad. Now, I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, and I will continue to monitor this situation all off season long. We will have a lot more information on this situation in late August when you're doing your fantasy football draft compared to right now. But as things sit right now, I am concerned with Nick Chubb enough to where running back 40 off the board feels laughably mispriced. Nick Chubb continues to progress from his season-ending knee injury where he had not one, but 2 separate surgeries, the first in September to repair damage to his medial capsule, meniscus, and medial collateral ligament. I'm not too sure what any of that, I know what some of it is, but again, I'm as much of a doctor as Johnny Sins, but then, Nick, that joke is overused. It is still funny. I'm as much of a doctor as Manuel Ferreira. And the second in November to repair the ACL. So 2 surgeries. But then Stefanski says, when he's ready, he will be ready. If he dies, he dies, right? When he is ready, he'll be ready. You know what that tells me? That they have no fucking idea when he's going to be. You know what that tells me? He's probably not going to be ready for week 1. So, as the running back 40, there's a chance that he is put on the IR to start the season. There's a chance that he misses 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 games this season. There's a chance that he doesn't step foot on the field at all. Now, based upon the Nick Chubb that we all know and love, I think he will go out there and play. But the question is, will he go out there and be the same Nick Chubb? More than likely, not. So as running back 40, when we saw Jerome Ford fill in solidly last season when Nick Chubb got hurt, I'm not sitting here and telling you that Jerome Ford is the next Bo Jackson, that he's even the next Nick Chubb. I don't think he is. I don't think he's that good. But I do think he's better than Jerome Ford. I think he's better than Deonta Foreman and Nyheim Hines. I think he's better than both of those guys who are the guys behind him. So I think Jerome Ford has solidified himself as the RB1 in this offense without Nick Chubb. 17 games played last year, 12 starts. He has 204 carries, 813 rushing yards. He could also catch passes, 66 targets, 44 receptions, 319 receiving yards, 9 total touchdowns, 12th at running back, 14th in yards created. Guess who's gone? Kareem Hunt. You want to know who was taking away a lot of targets? Kareem Hunt. Is Jerome Ford the best thing? Like, if you're the Browns, you obviously want Nick Chubb to be out there, right? You'd rather have healthy Nick Chubb versus Jerome Ford. Healthy Nick Chubb absolutely eviscerates Jerome Ford. But in terms of how healthy both guys are, Jerome Ford's fully healthy going into the season, and he didn't suffer a fucking gruesome injury. Like, you had to watch, you couldn't even find that on Twitter. You have to go on, like, Live Leak to watch it. Okay? So Jerome Ford as the running back 40, that is such a brutal misprice. I get drafting Nick Chubb. It's fine. If you want to draft Nick Chubb, go right ahead. But I think Jerome Ford is the better answer because he's coming off the board later, and I love the upside that he possesses. I don't know how great Deshaun Watson is going to be, but even when Deshaun Watson was even when the Browns were kind of just all right with cool Joe Flacco under center. Jerome Ford was still able to eat like a fat kid at a buffet. So I think Jerome Ford, the upside is the running back 40. I just keep finding myself drafting him on Underdog Fantasy. So thank you guys all so much for watching today's video. If you did end up enjoying, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button down below. Whether you are new to the channel or not, make sure you guys leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do, at NotoriousFantasy. Check out one of the videos on your screen if you haven't seen them already. We'll be back tomorrow with another banger of a video. I love you guys all so much. Hope you have a great one. And as always, good boy.